Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron-Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast, where we are helping property investors make better property decisions. A big question that we get is around property valuations, and I'm super pumped to have our special guest today, Nick Matz, who is a property valuer, associate director at Optian Valuers as well. And what we're going to be doing is shooting the breeze with Nick today, talking about valuations, getting a bit of lowdown on different types of valuations, what his expert opinion when he's going to look at a property as well. And I guess the big question is, what is the end result on a valuation, and why does that differ compared to maybe what someone's paid for it and the risk that comes with maybe a shortfall of a valuation? So super pumped, because I think this is probably the majority of questions I get when home buyers are looking or investors are looking to buy a property. It's the greatest fear is, will I be overpaying for a property and will the valuation come in low? So without any further ado, Nick, welcome to the studio.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. It's exciting to be here.
Excellent.
I've just come off the back of a month of leave, so
yeah, you're looking super relaxed.
Might be a bit rusty. I think the market's probably moved down here about $100,000 in the last month. So
isn't it amazing? I think it's probably what we want to have a chat about. It's market conditions. It's also, what does that mean from a valuer's perspective as well when the market moves super quick?
Yeah, it's super hard.
Right. And I guess you probably get peppered with a lot of questions. So why don't we get straight into it? And I think for those that are uninitiated, perhaps, it's what is a valuer and what is the role of a valuer as well?
Yeah, okay. So all the valuers have like a university degree qualification.
Yeah.
So I did property economics at UTS in Sydney. And then you have to work as an assistant valuer for a year before you can become a RPV.
Right.
Which is like the first level of valuer, and you can only value properties under $1 million. You can't do commercial stuff like that. And then after a year, you can apply to get your CPV, which is Certified Practicing Valuer.
Yeah.
And then you can basically value almost anything.
Okay.
So, the best part for us is that we're a huge national firm. We're now the biggest independent valuation firm in Australia.
Beautiful.
We cover 98% of the postcodes in Australia.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of support behind us. So, people don't really get given stuff that's outside of their depth because, we've got a whole bunch of support behind different people. And I know we've done some, really enormous vals, which I wouldn't take on, but I know that, we have the expertise and the team to be able to do it.
Yeah, great.
So, in terms of like qualifications and then, like our role, so 80 to 90% of our work would just be predominantly mortgage based. We contract to the bank, so we're independent, and we contract to all the banks. So we basically set the price that they're willing to lend at. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, that does stack up to the valuation or to the purchase price.
Yeah.
Or what people are estimating their property is worth if they're refinancing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately that's, like you mentioned, it's not always the case, and it can cause issues, particularly if people have bought at auction. Yeah. So they're obviously locked in, they've paid their deposit.
Spot on.
And then the valuation comes in short. Well, that means they're up for a bit more.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk about that. So you bought at auction, for example, even if you bought private treaty, you made an offer, and then the valuation comes in short. So what are some of the reasons that you would say that they come in your professional opinion, that a valuation comes in underneath what someone has paid for it?
Well, in a normal market, like no two houses are exactly the same. It's even in a new estate, when you have the same builders doing predominantly the same houses, they're slightly different finishes, and they're different, different sizes, and the blocks face a different direction, or the blocks are different size. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact number. So usually everything falls within, a reasonable range. Yeah. But then when you come back to why you might have a shortfall, a lot of the time it's because you don't have a really good comparable that has sold recently that you can say, hang your hat on and say, yes, it's either better than this one, or it's the same as this one, or it's worse than that one, and kind of fit it in the middle. Yeah. That's probably our biggest challenge, is a lot of the time you want to have an inferior sale a similar sale and a superior sale
to
at least kind of build your argument around why it's worth what it is.
Yeah.
But some properties, you just can't find that similar sale, which then makes it really hard to support.
Yeah.
And in a market like this one where, we all know it's just
super hot. Yeah.
Going crazy.
Yeah.
It's really hard to keep up with the market because the majority of the valuations are meant to be supported using settled sales.
Yes. Yeah.
So the hardest part that we get is in a market like this, 6 weeks ago, the market was different to what it is now.
Yeah.
So the sales really that have transacted in the last 6 weeks, you can consider them and you can use them within your report.
Yep.
But the basis of your valuation needs to be on settled sales.
Settled sales in what period? Because I think some people they're looking at property sales from exactly like you said 6 weeks ago. Some are looking at from maybe 8-9 months ago.
Yeah.
But what do you deem as a decent time range, you think?
So in a market like this, you want the ones that have just settled.
Okay.
But you're allowed to use things kind of up to 6 months old.
Yeah.
And then depending on where you are, like regionally located, some things take a long time to transact. Sure. You go back a little bit further. And then sometimes you get properties that are just really unique.
Yeah.
And to find something like that, you need to go back, maybe 2 years, something like that. There's been some properties around this area recently that I've valued.
Yeah.
And I know that I've gone back, kind of 18 months to support them, but because they're, beachfront or they're cliffront or something like that. And, and they're very rare to come by. So when you do get one like that, you tend to use it a fair bit.
Yeah. Okay.
But then you get to a point where, it's irrelevant anymore.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's your opinion that is backed by sales evidence.
Yeah.
Right. Can you be challenged on your
yeah,
opinion?
Yes. Yeah. So we can be challenged and it's funny because, you and I have had a few experiences where, vales have come in short or, we've said, well, we need to work within our parameters. So you can definitely challenge them.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things is, in a rising market, obviously, the brokers tend to get a bit upset if you're not in line with what the customer's expectation was.
Yeah.
Particularly if that means they can't then move on to buy the property that they wanted to buy.
What happens is it throws your loan to value ratio out, for example, right? So you might have a property that's bought at an 80% loan to value ratio. The valuation comes in short and now we're in mortgage insurance territory. And then you get a shortfall of valuation. It throws the entire client experience out the window as a broker from my own agenda. But I guess from you, you're not really privy to that. Or are you privy to information about what?
Yes, we don't get any of that.
Okay.
Our instruction is literally like XYZ Bank.
Yep.
Said, go and do this.
Right.
Here's the person to talk to.
Yeah.
And that's all we get given.
Yeah.
And you're not really meant to discuss the value of the property with the vendor that you're meeting.
Right.
Because we've been engaged by the lender to go there.
Yeah.
Really our responsibilities to the lender.
Yeah.
And they prefer to not kind of have a whole lot of interaction around what the value is and stuff. You need to be pleasant and professional and all the rest. But, if you say to someone, oh, yeah, 3 million, yeah, that should be okay. And then you go back and do your research and you're miles below that.
Yeah.
Well, you've just set this person's expectation at 3 million.
Yeah.
And then when their valuation comes back at 2.5, guess who's going to be upset? And then all of a sudden you get complaints and then you have big problems. So that's why a lot of the time it's, people are being professional and courteous, but in terms of value, it's not really discussed.
Yeah, right.
So, but yeah, we're not privy to the information that you guys have.
Yeah.
And then, shortfalls are something that we try to avoid, but sometimes difficult to get past.
Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of challenging, sorry, I forgot what your question was.
That's the whole point, right?
So in terms of challenging the val, from a broker's perspective, if you can get 3 settled sales and basically say, well, what about these ones?
Sure.
The valuer is obliged, like we have a queries team that then puts this together and says, hey, you need to go and have a look at this. The brokers send this through, and we provide a response.
Yeah.
And occasionally, that you might have found a sale that we didn't see.
Yeah. Okay.
And whether that's because of the workloads that we're dealing with at the moment, or it was just, might have been overlooked. And potentially that can get you an uplift.
Right.
But I've found in a lot of cases, the valuers have considered everything that's, available to them.
Sure.
And in the majority of cases, you're probably not going to find something that we haven't already found, but I have seen it. I've seen it, a number of times that the broker's been able to find a sale from somewhere that is fairly comparable. And, even if it's only a little bit, sometimes you can pull up 20 grand, but 20 grand for you might be the difference between
make or break on a deal.
Mortgage insurance or not mortgage insurance. Whereas to us, 20 grand is, that we're not privy to anything. So to us, if it's still within the range, then it's okay.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. So I guess you come into it at a full valuation stage. So talking about valuations, there are different types of valuations, right? So as a broker, when we order a valuation on a property, it's your desktop. So that goes back through to, say, CoreLogic, RP data that provide the bank with like a computer-based estimate.
Yeah. So there's the automated desktops.
Yep.
And then there's valuer desktops.
Okay, great.
So we also do a whole heap of them.
Yeah.
I probably do 15 of them a day.
Right.
That's across my whole region, which is pretty large.
Yeah.
But like the ability for the valuer to get out of that, it's a quick report.
Yeah.
It's obviously at a lot less fee than what it is for a valuation, but you can turn them around fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And the information that you can now gather from these online portals that CoreLogic and Velocity have put together is quite good. So you can pick up stuff pretty easily.
Great.
The desktop has kind of phased out the curbside to an extent.
Yeah.
Because there's not really a lot that you get from a curbside.
Yeah. So what you're talking about there is it can sometimes get bumped up from a desktop to what they call a curbside, which is what they like a drive-by to make sure the property exists. Yeah.
But there's not much that I can't find online that I'm going to see additionally if I drive past.
Okay.
In terms of street view and aerial maps and all sorts of stuff,
Beautiful.
I can pretty much already see what it looks like. So driving past won't really make a difference unless the photo's old and you've just built a brand new house or something like that. But the best part about desktops is I think what lenders like the most is that gives you an exact figure.
Yeah, okay.
There's little kind of repercussion on a desktop.
Yeah.
So you can't challenge a desktop. If you challenge it, it just gets upgraded to a full valuation.
Yeah.
Whereas with a curbside, it doesn't have an exact value. It has a value range. This is what we think it could be worth. And so that kind of, depending on where your LVRs are and your lending and all sorts of stuff, they're kind of not as useful anymore. If the bank's happy to adopt an exact figure, why bother with the range? And then some lenders will only adopt the bottom of that range.
Perfect.
Whereas some will adopt the top. So you go, well, depending on how big that range is, it could be a long way between the bottom and the top one. So
that's another part that comes up, which is some banks are a little bit more bullish on valuations compared to other lenders. So I could do 5 valuations with 5 different banks on the same property and get 5 different results, right?
Yeah.
So from your experience, when you've got, I don't know, a broker may order a valuation on the same property with, I don't know, St. George and CBA, and you get 2 different results. Why is that the case, for example?
Yeah, so and that's probably where it becomes hard. And I've been thinking about this since we spoke the other day. And different firms are kind of, ingrained in them a little bit differently. Like my team, I've kind of ingrained them to be, fairly optimistic and move with the market and try to see the best in the majority of these properties.
Yeah.
And my team, because we're so big, we now work in specific regions. So you might only do north of Wollongong to Helensburgh, and that's all you ever do. 5 days a week, you're just in that little pocket.
Yeah.
So fairly intimately almost every sale that transacts because you've probably been there at some stage or another.
Yeah.
Whereas other firms, and I have worked at other firms, is they're not as optimistic because, the fear is always that if you get your number wrong and then something happens to this client and the bank forecloses on them and happens to sell that property, if they can't sell it for what you valued it at, there could potentially be a lawsuit there.
Right.
That happens incredibly rarely. But it does happen.
But in banking, it's always the worst case scenario.
That's right. Everything is worst case.
Yeah.
So that becomes the fear for a lot of valuers is that, well, if I can't prove, and that comes back to the sales that we were talking about. If I don't have a good sale to prove that this property is worth what I'm saying it's worth, and then something goes wrong, and I get put in front of a court and they say, well, where was your comparable sale that proved that this thing was worth X? And you go, oh, well, I had this one at Z, and they go, well, that's not very comparable. And that's kind of the fear. And that incredibly rare that could happen, but it does happen. And that's usually the fear. So ultimately, if you ordered 3 vals and you had, one from Commonwealth, one from St. George and one from Westpac, ideally you'd probably want them all to go to the same firm, and then at least you get, the same result. But it's not uncommon to turn up to a house and there's 2 other valuers there.
Yeah, right.
So everyone's there. And you could potentially get 3 different figures.
Yeah.
So, you should, and this is the question I get asked all the time, don't your bank vals, they're like 10% lower than the market, aren't they? Or they're 20% lower than the market. It's our opinion on what you would sell that for today based on the information that we have available to us.
That's it.
And we're not as optimistic as the real estate agent coming in, because the argument is, if they get it wrong, well, what's the repercussion? They got it wrong. They didn't sell it. They lost nothing. Whereas the valuer comes in, gets it wrong, something bad happens, they end up in a courtroom and they have to justify their valuation. And I think that's where the main difference comes between the valuer and the real estate agent is what the repercussions could be depending on, how bad it might get.
Perfect. That's the exact question I'm probably going to go to next, which is the different numbers, right? So you've got what someone's paid for the property, what the real estate agents were kind of thought it was worth, and what the market thinks it's worth, and then what a valuer thinks it's worth. Yeah. So how do you navigate, I guess, those conflicting numbers when you're looking at a property going, has someone overpaid for this property, or this was what the market was willing to pay for it at, say, an open auction, right? Where you've got evidence that people were willing to pay for X for this property. How do you then come into it going, you try to manage a lot of these people's expectations as well?
Yeah, it's super hard, like particularly in a market like this one.
Yeah.
Even just talking to Andrew Headley, who's coming in later, they're listing properties at a price, but by the time they're selling them 6 weeks later, the market has moved.
Correct.
And so even their appraisal is different to what they can sell it for, because the market's moving that quickly.
Yeah.
And that becomes the constant struggle for the valuer is trying to prove it. So ultimately your aim is to kind of get all the research. You want to talk to the agent. You want to kind of get the feedback. If it was at an auction,
so you talk to the agent pretty freely.
We'd talk to the agents.
Beautiful.
A lot of them are really open.
Yeah.
And they have pretty good working relationships with us.
Fantastic.
And I'll say, how'd it go at the auction? And they say, oh, we just had one guy who was like went $1 million above everybody else. We go, it's probably not market. But if they say, we had 5 bidders and they were all within $5,000 of each other, and then, this last one just pipped everybody else as they dropped out, you go, right, well, at least the market is heading towards that price.
Yeah.
And then as long as you can find some comparable sales to fit into it, then hopefully you can make it stack up.
Beautiful. I know we worked on one recently, and you mentioned something called a check valuation, which a lot of people don't know about, right? I'm kind of curious to go there and go, so what is that for people that don't know what a check valuation is called? Yeah,
so you've obviously got your desktops and your curbsides, and a lot of them can't really be challenged.
Yeah.
And then you have your full valuation. So your full valuation is I'm coming out to your house. Yeah. I'm going to walk through every room. I'm going to measure the house. I'm going to take photos. Yeah. I'm going to do everything. So I know basically everything about your property.
Great.
Right? And then I'm going back and I'm comparing it to all the other properties that have sold recently. And the best part about our firm is, because we're so big, we've valued a lot of these other properties. Yeah. So we've been in it, we've measured it, we know exactly how big it is, exactly what it was like inside. We're not just basing it off the dolled up real estate agents' photos that you see online. We've actually been in there, we know what it's like. So then, for example, on this particular one, I think it was selling for 1.1, and another val firm had been there and they'd put $1 million on it.
Yeah.
Which when you looked at the sales, that they'd use, you think, well, that's a reasonable assumption, even though it's probably below the purchase price.
Yeah.
Not an ideal outcome for anybody.
Buyers,
yeah. The vendor, the purchasers, the broker,
the agent, everyone's all in it. Yeah.
So then, some lenders don't like check vals.
Yeah.
It does start to create a bit of inconsistency sometimes.
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes they're necessary. And so we spoke about getting a check val on this one, and
so that's very much like a second opinion.
And basically, and while some lenders don't like them, they are probably an important part, because ultimately it's my personal opinion based on the information that's available to me, what your place is worth.
Yeah.
But somebody else's opinion may be different to mine. And that's, it's meant to be, and it is based on the facts that you've got.
Yeah.
But, one street closer to the beach, in my opinion, is heaps better.
Yeah.
But to somebody who's
out of area.
Yeah, out of area, or, doesn't like the beach as much as I do, a couple of houses might not make a difference.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, if you're on the last street and then there's the beach, that's awesome. If you're 2 houses back, well, that's not as good. Whereas some people, kind of judge that as being the same.
Yeah.
So it is hard. And so as a broker, it's incredibly frustrating, I can imagine, to think that, well, really, like, I'd hope that all of our vals, steer a certain direction.
Yeah.
But it's hard. And that's why the third party mediator like Valex is such an important part of the process, because they kind of take out that valuer to broker, valuer to vendor relationship. Because
we really wouldn't talk unless the fact that we actually knew each other. But a broker very rarely has contact with a valuer, isn't it?
And like, even if I have a really difficult question for someone, it's really hard to try and find the contact number to get the details to talk to that person. Everything goes back through Valex, everything comes through Valex.
Yeah.
And it removes that, it removes kind of the conflict of, if we're mates, it removes the conflict of me just doing vals for you, basically. And it works really well, and it is a good process. Unfortunately, someone's opinion, another valuer's opinion might be different to my opinion. And that could be within the same firm.
I'm sure.
That could be within my office. Yeah. I know that there's been valuations where someone said, I think that's pretty high, or that's pretty low. Yeah. And I thought, I thought it was fairly reasonable. So then it's all an opinion thing.
Yeah.
So, people say that, it should be at what you've sold it for today. But unfortunately, some opinions are, well, that's really high. And we do get cases where someone will come in and the agent says, at the auction, this guy paid $200,000 over the second bidder. And you go, well, that's probably about $200,000 too high. But you get other ones where they're just fighting the whole time. And then if you can't find that comparable sale, it makes it really difficult.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Another popular question we get is, and maybe for investors and even people that own their own home, which is, I've done a whole heap of renovation work. Look at the black butt flooring I've got. Look at the gooseneck sink I've got, the tap, and some of those things that have a lot of value to them.
Yeah.
But I don't know, does it have a lot of value to you? And so I guess the question here is, I've done some renovation works and I want to get a revaluation because I've got a significant uplift in my property's value.
Yeah.
What are you looking for when someone comes in? Because you mentioned before that you don't really have a lot to do with the owner, perhaps, and maybe they're not there to convince you of all the work they've done.
Yeah.
But they're there to spruik their own work, right? And it's like, well, how do you come in and not be the realist, but kind of go, but what is actually important and what is of value to this property as well?
Yeah, and that's where we have. So we have, our most important things that we're looking for when we walk in, and a lot of research is done before we go.
Yeah, right.
Is like the size of the house, which is why we walk around and measure it up.
Yep.
The age of the house, and the quality of it. So, there's a huge difference between a 1990s house that's in an original condition and a 1990s house that's just had a 2021, massive renovation. But you can tell that the second that you walk in the door.
Yeah, right.
And you can tell a new bathroom to a 10-year-old bathroom straight away.
Yeah.
Particularly like on a good day, I'd probably do 10 to 15 valuations.
Yep.
So, that's 50 valuations a week. So, if I'm seeing that many houses, you pretty quickly catch on to, what looks new, what looks old, where they've done work here, where they've done work there. And it is good to have the conversation with the vendor, to say, have you recently done work? Tell me a little bit about it.
And so you're open to maybe finding out what work they've done.
Yeah. And you can have a little bit of a chat about it and and they'll tell you, this is where the house used to finish and then we took all these walls out and we went all the way out here and we spent all this and we did all that. And, they do tend to do over the top, but at least it gives you that good idea of, okay, well, this is exactly what it was before I was here and this is what it is now. And it kind of gives you a good idea of, how much money they've spent and what they're looking for. So, that's kind of the main things we're looking for at the house, and then obviously the size and the location of the block.
And some of those things you can't change, right? I guess on the inside, and that's the part, I guess, with the desktop or a curbside, you can't really see some of the work on the inside that's been done.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes why they get bumped up to a full val. And I guess the next part is then, some of the subjectivity that comes around the dollar for dollar. I guess you spend $1 to get $1, but people want to spend $1 to get $2 sometimes on the renovation, right?
Yeah, and that's if you can spend $1 and get $1, I think you probably that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But if you're spending $1 and expecting to get $2, it's probably not usually going to happen that way.
Yeah.
And some people manage to pull it off, but a lot of that has to do with market conditions or they've done all of the work themselves.
Sometimes we see a 3-bedder go to a 4-bedder.
Yeah.
That's a great example. Or 3-bed 1-bath that goes to 3-bed 2-bath, or you add on something that's special about it. But a lick of paint, some flooring really isn't going to get you that uplift, is it?
Yeah, if you spend $10,000, you might get back $10,000. But if you've spent like $150, then hopefully you'll get back that $150 in your new val. Maybe the market's moved, you might get a bit more.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing with any cosmetic reno is fine. It's anything that any structural renovation. It's important to kind of get it council approved. All the valuers are always checking the council DA trackers all the time.
Right.
So, if I come out to your house and say, Aaron's just put on like this huge back deck and this massive alfresco and he put a granny flat in the back corner. Yeah. And then I look up the DA tracker and there's just been nothing on your house for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, well, was any of that stuff approved? Oh, you don't need to worry about approval. It should be all right. Well, like we're meant to be valuing like what's approved as well. So not only what's there, but also what's approved is pretty important. So because technically the council could come past and say, well, we want you to tear that down, get rid of your granny flat, all the rest of it. So, if we've added a whole heap of value for these things that aren't approved, and then all of a sudden you get forced to take them all down, well, it's got to come back again.
And it happens more often than you think, isn't it?
Certain suburbs are renowned for it, but it happens all the time. And people think it won't be a problem, and it might not be. Until like someone comes out and picks up on it, or if you try to sell and someone's really savvy and they come out and they go, oh, it looks like it's been, renovated in the last 10 years or extended in the last 10 years. And then they look up the DA tracker and there's nothing. And you go, well, hold on. And then all of a sudden the building and pest report talks about all these extensions and renovations and the valuer's disregarding half the house because that hasn't been approved. And then all of a sudden things are not stacking up very well at all. And like some things don't need approval.
Yep.
Right. So you can put a 20 square meter shed in your backyard. Don't need approval.
Beautiful.
But, a lot of things do. And people underestimate that for sure.
Spot on. Maybe we could keep going. I could fire up a billion questions that I get about valuations, but I'm conscious of time. And look, Nick, I want to say thank you very much.
No worries.
I mean, the way that rolls off your tongue just kind of shows that you know what you're talking about. You've got years of experience. There is a science to valuations as opposed to an art. as well, which I tell a lot of people as
I think and that's probably the best way of explaining it. Constantly I'm saying what I said before in regards to the difference between the valuer and the real estate agent.
Yes.
And it's about probably the repercussions, and that's what a lot of valuers are worried about.
Yeah.
Which real estate agents aren't, because they're not sort of subject to the same rules.
I guess implications.
Basically, implications. Yeah.
Beautiful. Nick, thank you very much. I know if anyone listening that if valuations are kind of top of mind, or you've got any questions about valuations, drop us an email, send us a message as well, and rate this episode if you found it helpful. Nick, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll catch up soon talking all things valuations part 2.
Cool. Thanks mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See ya.